Her daughter was bullied at school. The new principal was her billionaire ex. I loved that man once. That's why it felt like a knife when I saw him behind that desk. The new principal. The billionaire who walked out on me 9 years ago and never knew he had a daughter. The school called about an incident with my 9-year-old. But they didn't tell me the truth. The man who abandoned me is now the only one standing between my child and the bullies who called her weird and said her father didn't want her. If you've ever had to protect someone you love from the very person who broke you, you already know why I couldn't turn back. The phone rang at 10:17 a.m. I almost didn't answer. For once, the house was quiet. The sink was empty. The radio hummed something soft. And I just convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, today would be gentle. Then I heard it. Mrs. Bernard? The voice was clipped, professional. This is Patricia from the front office. There's been an incident involving your daughter. Everything after that blurred. The mug slipped from my hand before she even said Zoila's name. I didn't even look back at the coffee bleeding across the counter. Zoila was 9, gentle to her core. The kind of child who said sorry when other people bumped into her. The idea of her hurting someone? Unthinkable. The idea of someone hurting her? All too real. My hands shook all the way to the car. The cold steering wheel felt alive under my fingers, trembling with me. The streets blurred past, but every stoplight felt like an accusation. If only I'd noticed sooner. If only I'd asked more questions. If only. The school looked the same: bright banners, trimmed hedges, a playground full of noise. But that morning, everything felt too clean, too rehearsed. The air smelled like disinfectant and bad news. Patricia met me by the door. A tired smile fixed on her lips. Mrs. Bernard, thank you for coming so quickly. Her voice wanted to sound routine, but her eyes gave her away. Pity makes people blink more. She led me down a gleaming hallway, shoes squeaking against the tile. The walls smelled of lemon cleaner and fresh paint, like they were trying to cover something up. We've had some administrative changes, she said, avoiding my eyes. The new principal wanted to speak with you directly. New principal? I frowned. Since when? Last week, she said, before stopping outside a door with a frosted glass panel. The words "Principal's Office" were neatly etched across it. Funny how 4 capital letters can make you feel 12 years old again. She knocked once. The door opened. And the moment I stepped inside, time betrayed me. Because behind that desk, in a polished suit, wearing the life he chose over me, was the man who once left me with nothing but rain in my hair and a positive pregnancy test in my hand. Judith, he said softly. And in that one word, the past reached out and gripped me by the throat. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. It wasn't denial. It was the kind of paralysis that happens when your heart tries to rewrite what your eyes are seeing. Hundley. Riley Hundley. 9 years hadn't dulled the sound of his name in my head. If anything, it landed heavier now, the way perfume grows stronger when sprayed on old fabric. He looked nothing like the boy who once fixed my sink with a butter knife and said he'd take care of me forever. This man, this version of him, wore success like armor, tailored navy suit, gleaming cufflinks, an expression that said authority before he even spoke. And still, his eyes hadn't changed. Those same quiet hazel eyes that once traced poems across my skin without saying a word. They looked at me now as if he was searching for someone who'd already left this room a long time ago. His voice cracked the silence between us. I didn't expect. No, I said, sharper than I intended. Neither did I. He gestured slowly to the chair across from his desk. Please. Sit. I stayed standing. My hands felt safer wrapped around my bag strap. Where's my daughter? I demanded. He turned, and that's when I saw her, Zoila, sitting small and folded up at the corner of the room, knees drawn to her chest, backpack clutched like a shield. One side of her braid had come undone, strands of hair sticking to her damp cheek. Her wrist had a faint red mark, the kind that says someone grabbed too hard. Every inch of me went cold. I crossed the room before thinking, kneeling down so fast the hem of my coat caught under my heel. "Zoe," I whispered. "Baby, are you okay?" She nodded, but her chin quivered. "They said I was weird," she murmured. "They said my dad didn't want me." That sentence carved straight through me, sharp and quiet and cruel. I could feel Hundley's presence across the room, heavy, still. I looked up at him slowly. "What happened?" I asked, the words almost shaking with restraint. He exhaled, sitting behind the desk again. Though his posture wasn't the confident, commanding stance from earlier, it was tight, defensive, haunted. "3 students," he began. "Matthew, Chad, and Robert. They cornered her during recess. They'd been teasing her for weeks. Today, it escalated." He paused, eyes lowering. "They pulled at her bag, called her names. One of them pushed her. My throat burned. And the teachers just missed that?" "They did," he admitted quietly. "But I didn't. That stopped me." "You didn't?" He nodded once. "I saw what was happening through the window. I was already on my way out when they pushed her." Zoila's tiny voice broke in. "But they still did it." She was right. They still did. He looked at her again, guilt shadowing his face. "You're right," he said softly. "They did. And that's on me." There was silence between us. The kind that stretches so long you start hearing your heartbeat in your ears. "Why now?" I finally asked. "After all these years, of all the schools, why this one?" He met my eyes. "Because I wanted to rebuild from the inside." He hesitated. "I didn't know you lived here, Judith." I swear. I wanted to believe him, but belief was something I rationed carefully these days. Especially with him. I brushed Zoila's face with my thumb. "You're not staying another minute longer than we have to," I told her, standing up. Hundley rose too. "Please just wait. Let's talk. You deserve an explanation." "She does." That last word, she was heavy with something unsaid. Something dangerous. I turned to him. "Deserve?" I repeated. "You don't get to use that word with me, Judith." "You walked away, Riley." The name tasted foreign now. "You walked away when walking away was the only thing you couldn't afford to do." He nodded slowly. "Understood." His calm was infuriating, the same calm that once made me trust him. That soft certainty that everything would be okay. It was the same tone he used the night he promised the future. And the same tone he used when he left. I started guiding Zoila toward the door, but she hesitated. Her small hand tugged on mine. "Mommy," she whispered. "Is he in trouble?" That question almost broke me. Hundley stepped forward, voice gentle. "No, Zoila. I'm not in trouble." She tilted her head. "But you're the boss, right?" A faint smile flickered at the corner of his mouth. "Something like that." "Then why didn't you stop them before?" she asked. The words landed in the room like a bell. Even the clock on the wall seemed to pause. He looked at her, startled. For a second, every layer of power fell off him, the billionaire, the reformer, the principal, and what was left was just a man realizing what his silence had cost. "You're right," he said finally. His voice barely a whisper. "I should have." Zoila looked puzzled, uncertain what to do with his honesty. And maybe that's what made it hit harder, because adults rarely apologize to children. We justify. We explain. But he didn't. He just said it. I blinked, feeling something dangerously close to empathy stir inside me. I buried it fast. Turning to Zoila, I said, "Come on, sweetheart. Let's get you home." Hundley nodded. "I've already arranged for the boys to be suspended pending review. Their parents will be here this afternoon." I gave a short, humorless laugh. "Rich parents, I assume." He didn't answer, which told me everything I needed to know. For a moment, neither of us moved. I could feel the weight of his gaze, the questions he didn't dare ask pressing against his composure. Questions that would unravel both of us, if I let them. I touched Zoila's shoulder. "We're done here." But as we reached the door, he spoke quietly, almost desperate. "Judith, please. Just one conversation. You owe me that much." I froze. "Oh, you?" He swallowed hard, his voice breaking slightly. "She deserves to know why I wasn't there." The air in the room thickened. I turned, eyes sharp enough to cut glass. "No," I said. "She deserves peace. Something you've never given anyone." And with that, I opened the door. But before we could leave, Zoila looked up at him again, curious, brave, unguarded, the way only children can be. "Will you still be the boss tomorrow?" she asked. He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I'll be here." "Good," she said softly. "Then maybe you can stop them before next time." Then she walked out, head high. I followed, stunned by the grace that belonged to someone far too young to carry this kind of wisdom. Behind me, I heard the faintest sound, his breath shaking out, the weight of something heavy settling. Maybe guilt, maybe realization, maybe both. As the office door clicked shut, all I could think was how absurd life can be. How after years of rage and silence and rebuilding yourself piece by piece, the past can still find your address, your phone number, your child. And the worst part? It was only the beginning. The nurse's office smelled faintly of peppermint and hand sanitizer. Teresa, the guidance counselor, had a voice so calm it could settle thunder. She crouched beside Zoila, whispering reassurances as she examined the faint bruise around her wrist. "She'll be fine," Teresa said gently. "I just want to put some ointment on it and have her rest a bit." Zoila looked up at me, uncertain. "I'll be right here, baby," I said, brushing her hair away from her face. "Go with Teresa. I won't leave until you're ready." She nodded, small and trusting, and followed the counselor down the hall. The sound of her shoes fading on the linoleum was the loneliest sound I'd ever heard. For a moment, I stood in the doorway, unsure of what to do with the silence that followed. And then I turned back to him, Hundley or Riley, as he was before all the suits and headlines hadn't moved from behind his desk. But the tension in his shoulders looked heavier now, like he was carrying a building instead of a title. Years ago, I used to read the smallest changes in his face, when he was lying, when he was afraid, when he was about to say something he couldn't unsay. Right now, his expression was a map of all three. "Why are you still here?" I asked. He looked up, startled. "Because we need to talk." I crossed my arms. "We don't. We did that conversation 9 years ago. Remember? You did most of the talking. Something about timing and responsibility and how you weren't ready." "Judith, please," he said, his voice low. "That wasn't what?" I snapped. "Wasn't the moment I realized I'd been loving a man who only looked brave in boardrooms? Because that's exactly what it was." His eyes dropped to the floor. He took a step closer. "I never knew." The simplicity of it made me laugh. This short, pathetic sentence meant to fix everything. "You never knew?" I said, the sarcasm spilling over. "You think that makes it better?" "I didn't," he said, again, and for once, his voice wasn't defensive. It was raw. "You left. You cut all contact. Because you made it clear." I shot back. "You made it crystal clear that I was inconvenient." That word still stung, like touching an old scar that never healed right. He ran a hand down his face. "I was 27, Judith. I thought I had to choose between my career and us. I finished for him. I remember." He nodded weakly. "I chose wrong." For a heartbeat, the words hung there, heavy and almost cruel in their sincerity. I wanted to tell him it was too late for that kind of confession. But part of me, the part that had once loved him stupidly, was still listening. "How did it happen?" he asked quietly. How did she happen?" I turned toward the window. because looking at him made breathing hurt. It wasn't complicated, I said. It was two people who thought love would be enough. And it wasn't. He stepped closer. Judith. Is she? Don't. My voice cracked like glass. Don't finish that sentence. The silence was thick again, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. She's mine, isn't she? He finally asked. The room blurred for a second. The hum of the air conditioner, the faint shouts from the playground outside, they all drifted away until there was just that question. I wanted to lie. God help me. I wanted to lie if it meant protecting the tiny fortress of peace I'd built around Zoila and myself. But looking at him, seeing the tremor in his hands, the brokenness he tried to swallow, it was impossible. Yes, I said at last. The word left my mouth like a verdict. He sat down hard, as if the weight of that truth physically knocked him backward. He covered his mouth, staring at nothing. How old? 9. He repeated it under his breath. 9. Then he laughed. Not out of joy, but disbelief. 9 years. That's an entire lifetime. I folded my arms tighter, trying to hold myself together. A lifetime you walked away from. He looked up sharply. I didn't walk away from her. I didn't know she existed. I tilted my head. You didn't want to know. That's not the same thing. He blinked. And for a moment, the confident man everyone admired disappeared. What was left was the man from that night, the one who looked terrified when I told him I was late, who promised to call back and never did. I thought I was giving you space to make your own choice, he said, almost whispering. You were giving yourself an excuse to run. That hit him. I saw it in the tightening of his jaw, in the way his eyes darted toward the floor, searching for a version of the story that didn't make him a coward. Where did you go? He asked. After that. Now you care? I said softly. When it wouldn't cost you anything? He didn't answer. Men like him rarely do when the truth isn't flattering. I sighed, closing my eyes for a second. I should have walked out. But some part of me, some foolish, angry part, needed him to hear exactly what he'd missed. She was born in May, I said finally. Rained that morning. The nurses joked she came in on thunder. I didn't have anyone there. My sister held the camera. I didn't look at the pictures for weeks. He swallowed hard. Judith. She looked like you, I continued. Still does. Actually. Same eyes. Same stubborn little crease in her brow when she's concentrating. Every parent-teacher conference, I'd see the dads picking up their kids and think, well, you know. His face crumpled, and he pressed his palms together like a man praying for a time machine. I can't, he started. Voice breaking. 9 years. I missed 9 years. The sentence cracked open something in the air. I wanted to hate him. I really did. But there was something deeply heartbreaking about seeing the man who always had every answer lose his footing completely. Don't do this, I said quietly. Don't stand there and act like you just realized there were consequences. I'm not, he said, shaking his head. He took a breath, trying to steady it. I thought success would fix everything. I thought if I could just get far enough ahead, I'd come back someday and make things right. I looked at him then, long and hard. There's no someday, Riley. There's only now or never. You're 9 years too late. He nodded slowly, almost as if he agreed. I know. He sat there for a long time, unmoving, his hands trembling slightly on the desk. Then, very quietly, he said, Does she know anything? Not yet, I said, and she won't, not now, not until I decide she's ready. He accepted that without argument, his expression hollowed out with grief. That's fair, he murmured. You've done everything on your own. You protected her. I didn't even know her name until today. She didn't need you to know her name, I said. She needed stability. She needed laughter and bedtime stories and someone to fight for her. And she had that. She had me. He nodded again, looking down. You did everything I should have done. The clock ticked in the background, a slow, merciless rhythm marking all the years we'd lost. Finally, he said the one thing I wasn't ready for. I want to do better, he whispered. Not for me. For her. Even if she never knows who I am. That almost undid me. Because this voice, the voice stripped of ambition, stripped of pride, was the one I'd fallen for once. But I couldn't let mercy make me reckless again. I swallowed hard and straightened my shoulders. Then start by fixing this school. The bullying. The teachers looking away. Be the man you pretend to be when cameras are rolling. That's what she needs. He nodded, his lips pressed tight. I will. I turned toward the door, but before leaving, I said quietly, don't contact me outside of school matters. Not yet. He didn't argue. Just whispered again, as if to himself, I've missed 9 years. I paused, hand on the doorknob. For the first time, the billion-dollar man sitting behind that desk didn't look powerful. He looked like a father realizing what regret really costs. I almost said something back, but some truths deserve their silence. So I walked away. And behind me, I heard him whisper that sentence once more, breaking apart between breaths. I've missed 9 years. The weeks that followed slipped by, in quiet increments, one morning bell at a time. It began subtly. Notices on classroom doors. A new poster in the hallway that read in bold letters, kindness is the first rule here. Someone had taken down the old zero tolerance signs, those brittle declarations no one ever enforced, and replaced them with something softer, more human. At first, I thought it was for show, a press-friendly initiative, the kind of surface-level gesture that made men like Riley Hundley look good in interviews. But then I started noticing details too small to be for cameras. The students began lining up differently, teachers watching more carefully, speaking more kindly. The morning announcements stopped listing detentions and started highlighting small acts of empathy. A student helping another with homework, someone turning in a lost wallet. Zoila noticed first. Mom, she said one afternoon, sliding into the car after school. Mr. Hundley had us write letters to ourselves about what kind of person we want to be. I smiled faintly. And what did you write? She grinned, brushing crumbs from her sleeve. That I want to be the kind of person who makes other people feel safe. It caught me off guard because that word, safe, was everything I'd been chasing for her since the day she was born. But even as I nodded and told her how proud I was, part of me tightened. Change, in my experience, was usually temporary. That evening, when she went to bed, I found myself replaying that conversation like a recording left on loop. Every word made me uneasy in ways I couldn't explain. The next morning, I walked Zoila to the school gates for the first time in a while. The campus looked brighter, more alive. Banners reading "We Stand Together" fluttered in the wind. Teachers stood outside classrooms, greeting each student by name. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe guilt had made him efficient. Then I saw him. Across the playground, standing near the oak tree by the fence, Riley watched the students trickle in. He spoke quietly to a teacher, then crouched to pick up a piece of litter himself. Not a choreographed moment, no camera, no staged kindness. Just a man doing. He saw me watching. For a second, our eyes met. He didn't wave. I didn't nod. But something wordless passed between us. Acknowledgement. Maybe. Respect. Begrudging. And fragile. That evening, Zoila bounced into the kitchen humming. Guess what? She said. They made a new rule. Everyone has to sit with someone they don't know at lunch once a week. That's smart, I said, stirring the soup. Yeah. Mr. Hundley said, it's hard to hate someone after you've shared your applesauce with them. I laughed because it sounded exactly like something the man I once knew would say. But then the laughter faded, because that man existed in memory, and memories don't make amends. The following week, an email went out to parents. An invitation to a new series of anti-bullying assemblies. Zoila's class was set to perform a short presentation about empathy. I almost deleted the message, but something stopped me: curiosity, maybe, or the faint pull of accountability. When I arrived at the assembly, the atmosphere surprised me. It wasn't forced. The gym was quiet but warm. Rows of kids sitting attentively. The hum of curiosity instead of restlessness. Hundley stood off to the side, letting the teachers lead. He only spoke once. At the end. "Schools can build futures," he said simply, "but only if every child believes they belong in that future." And just like that, he stepped back, letting the applause belong to them. It wasn't performative. It was plain-spoken, humble, quietly true. Zoila came home that evening more talkative than usual. "We have this new box near the office," she said. "It's for secret notes, like, if something bad happens and you're scared to talk." "Anonymous reporting?" I asked. She shrugged. "I guess. But everyone calls it the courage box." Something about that name made my chest tighten. That night, after Zoila was asleep, I sat by the window with my tea cooling in my hands. Outside, the streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement. And somewhere between the stillness and the distant hum of the refrigerator, a memory surfaced, one I'd spent years keeping buried. The night I told Riley I was pregnant. It had been raining then, too. He was sitting on the floor of our first apartment, papers spread everywhere, talking about investors and proposals and flights to New York. I remember saying it softly. "Riley, I'm late." He froze. Then he smiled a small, terrified smile and said, "How late?" He sat very still, staring at the wall, his hand over his mouth. "I can't," he whispered. "Not now." Everything after that was a blur of half-finished sentences and empty reassurances. Even then, he wanted to believe he was making the right decision by leaving. He'd called it space. I'd called it cowardice. But the truth? We were both wrong. Now, watching him from a distance, seeing how his voice softened around children, how staff meetings ran longer, how policies shifted from performance to protection, I realized something I didn't want to admit. He wasn't trying to rewrite the past. He was trying to redeem the present. 2 weeks later, the school introduced new programs: peer mentors, monthly kindness campaigns. The walls that once echoed with gossip now carried messages like, "We lift each other." Even the bullies, Matthew, Chad, and Robert, were different. I saw them one morning standing near the flagpole, cleaning up after an event under teacher supervision. Not humiliation, accountability. Zoila started coming home. Lighter, more open. "One night," she said as she set her backpack down, "we talked today about forgiveness, Mr. Hundley said, it's not about pretending nothing happened. It's about deciding what deserves to live inside you." It took me a moment to respond. "That's very wise," I said. She grinned. "He says grown-ups forget that sometimes." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Over the next few days, I caught glimpses of him, never up close, always from the edges. Standing at the front gate in the morning, offering a polite smile to every parent. Listening to a student's shaky recital in the music room. Carrying boxes to the library instead of calling maintenance. It was unnerving, in a way. Watching a man I once considered heartless spend his days rebuilding something that actually mattered. Not luxurious, not profitable, just good. And yet, I couldn't shake the bitterness. Change didn't erase what came before. It only illuminated how late it arrived. One Friday afternoon, as I signed out from the office after volunteering at the book fair, I heard laughter echoing from the courtyard. Zoila's laughter. I turned my head and for a moment saw her and Hundley standing near the garden beds. She pointed at something in her notebook, and he leaned down to listen. There was nothing dramatic about it, no revelation, no sentimentality, just a quiet scene of a man listening to a little girl talk about her plants. I couldn't move for a second. Later that night, lying awake, I tried to name what I felt. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It was recognition that maybe people don't change who they are, They reveal who they could have been if they hadn't been afraid. The following Monday, I attended a parent meeting about the new initiatives. Staff spoke about progress, data, measurable, impact. But what struck me most wasn't the numbers. It was the way the air in that room felt lighter, hopeful. And at the back of the room, Hundley stood quietly, notebook in hand, letting everyone else take credit. He caught my eye once. There was no smile, no invitation, just a silent acknowledgement that maybe we were both seeing something unfamiliar but good taking shape. When the meeting ended, I walked out before anyone else, my footsteps echoing through the empty hall. The banners overhead fluttered slightly in the air-conditioned breeze. "We stand together." It was the kind of phrase I would have mocked, once too optimistic, too naive. But not that night. As I passed the office, I saw him again through the frosted glass. Head bent over paperwork, sleeves rolled up, the light from the desk lamp tracing new lines across a face I thought I'd memorized years ago. It hit me then, the difference between control and care. He wasn't trying to control the narrative anymore. He was changing it. Sometimes bravery doesn't look like running into fire. Sometimes it's a 9-year-old standing behind a microphone, trying not to tremble while the whole world watches. The night before the talent showcase, Zoila sat cross-legged on the living room floor, reading her poem out loud to the empty coffee table. Her voice was so small, I could barely hear her over the hum of the refrigerator. "It's supposed to sound stronger," she said, frowning. "Like the people on TV who read the news. You don't need to sound like anyone else." I reminded her, smiling. "You just need to sound like you." She nodded, though the worry didn't leave her face. I'd offered to help her practice again, but she shook her head. "Mister, Hundley said poems are about heartbeats. If you say what's true, people will feel it, even if your voice shakes." For a moment, I didn't know whether to be proud or unsettled. Later that night, after she went to bed, I stood in the doorway of her room and watched her sleep. Her crumpled paper still sat on the nightstand, full of tiny pencil smudges and crossings out. The title at the top read, "When They Called Me Weird." It took everything in me not to crumble right there. I almost didn't go to the showcase. Half of me wanted to protect her from every possible pain, to shield her from the sound of laughter or whispers if she stumbled. The other half knew she'd already earned her moment, and that shrinking away from it would only teach her fear. So, I went. An hour early, because mothers like me never truly stop worrying. The auditorium was decorated with care, paper lanterns strung along the ceiling, letters spelling, "Be Bold," taped over the stage curtain, rows of folding chairs filled with parents clutching cameras and half-wilted flowers. The air buzzed with that strange mixture of pride and nerves only children can summon. Zoila spotted me as she lined up with her class backstage. Her shoulders relaxed just a little when I waved. Then she mouthed, "You came," and my chest answered back, always without sound. When her turn came, she stepped forward, clutching her note card. Her braids pulled tight this time. Stage lights spilled over her face, making her look both tiny and infinite. The microphone wobbled slightly as she adjusted it. "I wrote this poem," she began softly, "because words can hurt, but they can also help." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Her first lines came steady. "They said I was different. They said I was strange. But maybe strange is just the first step of change." You could feel the room starting to lean toward her. And then, it happened. From the third row, a whisper, sharp and unmistakable. Laughter. "Matthew," one of the boys. I saw his head tilt toward Chad, a smirk twisting across his mouth. Zoila faltered midline. Silence crawled across the room. Her chin wobbled. Her tiny hands gripped the note card tight enough to crease it. Before I could move, he did. Riley Hundley rose from his seat at the end of the row, no rush, no theatrics, just deliberate, undeniable presence. The entire audience turned as his voice filled the room, calm and commanding. "Enough," he said. Silence snapped back like a rubber band. His tone wasn't angry, it was something deeper, controlled, respectful, but absolute. He faced the crowd, not the boy. "We do not belittle courage in this school." The words landed like stone, and yet somehow they sounded almost gentle, as if he was speaking to every child who'd ever been laughed at, to every adult who once was. For a moment, no one breathed. Zoila looked at him, really looked, and then at the crowd. And slowly, she turned back to the microphone. Her voice trembled at first, then found its footing. "They said I was weird. And maybe I am. Because I see colors when people speak. And sometimes, their blue feels like my calm. They said I was quiet. But maybe silence is just listening with your heart. And maybe courage is just standing here, being seen and not running away from it." When she finished, the room didn't erupt into applause right away. Instead, there was a moment of stillness, like everyone needed a second to exhale. Then the clapping began. Real, whole, rising like a tide. Zoila's eyes shimmered with disbelief. She looked out into the sea of faces, searching. When she found mine, she smiled so wide her cheeks dimpled like she was 6 again. I was already crying. Quietly, the way mothers do, half pride, half ache. Across the crowded room, Riley stood by the wall, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed only on her. He wasn't the principal in that moment. He wasn't the billionaire, the reformer, the man rebuilding his image. He was just a father watching his daughter find her own footing in a world he once made uncertain. When Zoila stepped off the stage, her friends pulled her into a hug. Even the teachers were clapping. Matthew ducked his head. His mother whispered something stern that turned his ears pink. Justice. Small but visible. Hundley waited until the applause died down before sitting again. No smile, no self-congratulation, just quiet pride, layered with something that looked a lot like remorse. When the showcase ended, I went backstage and found her sitting on the floor, still clutching her note card like treasure. "You were incredible," I said. She giggled. My hands were shaking so much I thought the microphone might fall. I knelt beside her, brushing back a loose braid. "You didn't just read a poem, Zoila. You taught people something tonight." She tilted her head. "What did I teach them?" "That being brave isn't loud," I said softly. "Sometimes it's just standing tall when the world gives you a reason to shrink." She beamed, small, proud, whole. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him again. Standing quietly by the exit doors, watching from a respectful distance, keeping himself in the background. When our eyes met, he didn't look away, but there was no expectation there, only recognition of what she had become, of what he had missed, of what he still hoped to mend. Later that night, when Zoila was asleep, I sat in the dark living room, replaying the moment over and over, the microphone, the trembling voice, the sentence that stopped the room cold. Asterisk. We do not belittle courage in this school. Asterisk. The line circled my thoughts long after midnight. Softer each time, until it felt less like something he said and more like something he meant. Because for once, it wasn't about image or redemption. It was about protection, about righting a wrong not with promises, but with presence. When I finally went to bed, I paused by Zoila's door. Her note card was pinned to the wall, now with a single piece of tape, the pencil lines smudged from nervous fingers. And as I closed the door gently behind me, I realized something I hadn't dared to before. For the first time, she wasn't the only one learning how to be brave. That night, the house smelled like lavender detergent and leftover soup. Zoila had gone to bed early, still buzzing from the applause, her poem folded neatly under her pillow. Outside, the air was cool, the kind of calm that comes after a storm you didn't realize you'd survived. I was washing the last of the dishes when I heard 3 soft knocks on the front door. Not urgent, hesitant, familiar. For a second, I just stood there, heart thudding against my ribs. Because some sounds never forget their way back to you. When I opened the door, the streetlight caught the edge of his face. Riley Hundley, still in the same dark suit from the showcase, his tie loosened, his hair slightly disheveled. He looked less like a billionaire, and more like a man who'd spent the evening wrestling his own ghosts. "Judith," he said softly. The way he said my name made the years collapse again, but I didn't let it show. "It's late," I said. "I know. He hesitated. "I didn't want to leave tonight as it was. Not after what I saw." I crossed my arms, leaning against the frame. "You saw a girl read a poem. She doesn't need your gratitude." "It's not gratitude," he said. "It's accountability." That made me pause. He took a small step closer, stopping at the edge of the porch light's glow. "I wanted to say thank you, not for tonight, for all the nights before it, for raising her brave." Something in my chest tightened. "You didn't come here for a thank you. Men don't knock at midnight just to say words that sound good in print." He exhaled a laugh under his breath, one that held no amusement. "You're right. I came because I don't know what comes next. And for once, I'm not pretending I do." I didn't answer. "Sometimes, silence is the only power you have left." He shifted, looking down at his hands. "I'm not asking to be her father. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I just want the chance to earn my way toward knowing her. Slowly. In the way you choose. On your terms." The sincerity of it unsettled me. It wasn't polished. It wasn't rehearsed. It was the kind of raw honesty that doesn't come easy to men who've built empires on control. "You think saying that fixes anything?" I asked quietly. He looked up, and in the porch light, I saw exhaustion in his eyes, the kind that goes deeper than lack of sleep. "No, nothing fixes it. But maybe something can start." The hum of crickets filled the pause between us. Inside the house, the clock ticked faintly. Every sound felt louder than the moment itself. I folded my arms tighter. "If you mean what you're saying, then you'll respect my boundaries. No unexpected visits. No grand gestures. No promises to her you can't keep." "I understand. And when she asks questions, I decide what she hears, when she's ready." He nodded. "All of it. I'll follow your lead." It sounded too easy, too agreeable. The man I remembered always wanted control, even when he called it compromise. So I studied him, waiting for the familiar flicker of impatience. It never came. Instead, he said quietly, "Judith, I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to know seeing her tonight, hearing her speak made me realize how much of my life has been noise, and how much of hers I've missed." I wanted to say something cruel, to remind him he had choices, that absence was still a decision, but the truth sat heavy on my tongue. "You can't fight a confession that already condemned itself." "You said you're not asking to be her father," I murmured. "Then, what are you asking for?" He hesitated. "A chance to be present, even if it's from a distance." The words hung there, like fragile glass. There was something almost sacred in their simplicity. I took a slow breath. "You can start by respecting the distance. No introductions. No accidental run-ins. If she notices you, she should notice you as her principal. Nothing more. Understood?" "Then that's it," I said, stepping back slightly. "Good night, Riley." He nodded, but didn't move right away. His voice, when it came again, was quieter. "You're right to protect her. She deserves better than uncertainty." He paused. "But so do you." That last sentence landed harder than it should have. I turned toward the house before he could see my eyes blur. When I closed the door, I didn't realize I was holding my breath until I heard his footsteps fade down the driveway. For a long time, I just stood there, forehead against the wooden frame, palms cold against the glass. And then, a small voice from the hallway. "Mommy?" Zoila stood there in her oversized pajama shirt, rubbing her eyes. "Who was at the door?" I forced a small smile. Just my old boss. We were talking about school. She nodded. Half asleep. You looked sad. I'm not sad, I said, pulling her into my arms. Just thinking. Her cheek pressed against my shoulder. He was nice to me at school. He listens. I froze. Those 3 words. He listens. They carried more weight than she could possibly understand. Does he? I asked carefully. She nodded. Yeah. Not like most adults. He really listens. Like the kind where you feel seen. My throat tightened. Maybe that's because he's learning, I said softly. She looked up at me then, eyes curious. Do you think grown-ups can learn to be brave too? I smiled. I think sometimes they have to. She seemed satisfied with that. Good, she said simply, and padded back toward her room. After I tucked her in again, I sat on the edge of her bed for a moment, watching the rise and fall of her breathing. Her note card from the poem still hung above her pillow. We do not belittle courage in this school. I brushed a hand across her hair and whispered, neither in this home. When I finally stepped back onto the porch, the night had deepened. The streetlight across the road flickered, painting the world in brief flashes, light, dark, light again. In the silence, I realized how much I was still holding on to anger, loss, fear that opening that door again, even metaphorically, might undo all the healing I'd fought for. But there was also something else underneath it, quiet recognition. Maybe he really didn't come to take anything this time. Maybe he came to give something back. And for the first time in years, I believed that slow didn't have to mean never. So I whispered what I couldn't say in front of him. On my terms, Riley. But yes, you can try. The wind picked up slightly, stirring the chime by the window. It sounded almost like an answer. Spring came quietly that year. The air smelled of cut grass and rain that never quite reached the ground. The mornings grew softer and so, slowly, did I. Riley kept his word. No late-night visits. No unscheduled appearances at my door. He stayed within the small circle I drew, each boundary like a brick in a fragile new wall between past and present. But little by little, I began noticing him, on the edges of Zoila's days. Never imposing, never too close, always there. He started walking her to class in the mornings, not every day, just sometimes. I'd watch from the car as he stood by the gate, nodding politely to the teachers, his posture careful, respectful. Zoila would talk his ear off about whatever book she'd just finished or the new words she learned in science class. And he, the man who once filled rooms with speeches and investors, just listened. That was what struck me most. The silence. The discipline of it. He didn't offer solutions or praise for show. He didn't make big declarations. He just let her talk, and that, somehow, was louder than anything he could have said. At first, I thought it was coincidence. Then I realized it wasn't. He was giving her exactly what I used to beg him for. A steady presence. No grand gestures. No fixing. Just quiet attention. Some afternoons, when I picked her up, she'd tell me small things that built into something bigger. Mr. Hundley sat with us at lunch today. Or, he asked what my favorite part of poems is. She didn't say it with excitement, more like observation, like it was starting to feel normal. One Friday, I arrived early for pickup and saw them sitting under the tree near the courtyard. She was reading from a small notebook while he leaned against the bench, listening intently. Every few lines, she'd pause, looking up at him for a reaction. He'd smile faintly, never interrupting, and she'd go on. I stayed in the car, watching through the windshield, my chest tightening with something I couldn't name. Not anger. Not fear. Just realization. This was how trust is built. Not through promises, but through patterns. Later that evening, over dinner, Zoila told me she was helping him test out idea cards, slips of paper where students could write thoughts about what they wish adults understood. She giggled. He says grown-ups need help paying attention. And he said, paying attention is love in practice. That line hit me like a stone thrown softly, in just the right place. It wasn't something you could argue with, and it sounded less like the man who left me in the rain and more like the man who'd finally learned what rain costs. He began showing up at school, events quietly, sports days, art exhibitions, assemblies. He never drew attention to himself. He didn't take pictures with cameras or post online about reform. He stood at the back, hands in his pockets, always letting the kids own the stage. Once, during Zoila's art showcase, she drew a small painting titled Sunrise After Storm. Thick swirls of blue at the bottom, a rising golden hue breaking through. When the teacher asked her what inspired it, she said, "Sometimes people can surprise you." The room chuckled softly, all except me, who suddenly couldn't breathe. After the show ended, I noticed Riley standing by the exit door again. He didn't approach. He just waited until Zoila walked over, handed her a small folded paper, and left without saying anything. That night, I found the paper tucked inside her backpack. It was a quote, written in his neat block handwriting. "The sun doesn't ask permission to rise again. It just does. No name, no signature, just that." She'd taped it above her desk. Days blurred into weeks, and things began to feel. I still guarded every inch of the distance between us, but my resentment had softened into something quieter vigilance, mixed with reluctant gratitude. Because the truth I didn't want to say aloud was simple. He was trying, and trying well. One afternoon, Zoila came home and asked, "Mom, were you scared when I was little?" I looked up from the dishes. "Scared of what?" "Everything," she said seriously. "Mr. Hundley says being scared doesn't mean you're weak, it means you care." I froze, sponge still in my hand. "And what do you think?" I asked gently. She considered it. "I think he's right. Maybe being brave isn't not being scared. Maybe it's what you do while you are." I smiled faintly. "You've been listening carefully." "So has he," she said without hesitation. I turned. "What?" "He listens," she repeated. "Like, really listens. When I talk, I can tell he's hearing the words I didn't say yet." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Because that was the one thing I had begged for, once upon a time. The one thing he couldn't do when it mattered most. And now, all these years later, he was giving it not to me, but to the little girl who deserved it far more. That evening, I sat on the porch, watching dusk fold the light across the street. Zoila's laughter drifted in from her room, and I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Exhausted, yes. Guarded, absolutely. But anger needs fuel, and that fire, it seemed, had finally run out. My mind drifted to the man. He used to be the one so terrified of slowing down that he mistook stillness for failure. The one who thought love was measured by achievement instead of attention. He had built skyscrapers but never learned how to stay in one room long enough to see a promise through. Until now. I wasn't ready to call it redemption, but I was willing to call it effort. And that counted for something. The next morning, Zoila handed me her backpack and kissed my cheek. "You don't have to walk me in today," she said. "Why?" "Because Mr. Hundley said he'd walk me." We're talking about our idea cards again. For a second, I hesitated, every instinct screaming to say no. But Zoila was beaming, her trust untainted by old stories she didn't yet know. "Okay," I said cautiously, "but stay where people can see you." She laughed. "Mom, it's school, not outer space." As I watched her skip down the driveway, I noticed him waiting by the corner, hands in his coat pockets. He nodded once, a quiet thank you, disguised as simple acknowledgement. And in that moment, I surprised myself by nodding back. When they reached the gate, Zoila said something that made him laugh. Really laugh. Shoulders loosening, head tilted slightly back. He looked younger for a moment. Free. Even. And I knew then what I hadn't dared admit before. Paternal love, the real kind, isn't something you claim. It's something you earn in these slow, ordinary minutes no one claps for. Later that day, I found one of Zoila's idea cards left on the kitchen table. Tiny handwriting, uneven letters. I think when people really listen, it makes others brave. I smiled. Because she was right. And because she didn't know how much of that sentence belonged to both of us. That night, I pinned the note on the refrigerator beside her poem, When They Called Me Weird. 2 pieces of her heart growing braver side by side. Then I glanced out the window into the fog-thick night and thought about all the ways a man can learn to show up. Maybe this was the lesson life had been circling around all along, that fatherhood is not blood or title or apology. It's the quiet art of showing up slowly, consistently, humbly, until someone else finally feels safe enough to keep speaking. And in that small, steady rhythm of trust between them, I found something resembling peace. It happened on an ordinary Thursday. No big moment, no announcement. Just the soft unraveling of all the walls I'd spent years fortifying. The sky was gray that morning, the kind of gray that makes you feel like things are waiting to begin again. I was sitting in the teacher's lounge, dropping off the donation box Zoila and I had prepared for the upcoming charity drive, when I saw him through the window. Riley stood by the courtyard gazebo, sleeves rolled up, talking quietly with a maintenance worker. He wasn't directing. He was helping, handing over tools, laughing at something I couldn't hear. In the past, I would have rolled my eyes. Another performance. Another image. But months had passed since the last time I caught him trying to be noticed. Now, he looked like he'd finally stopped performing for the world and started showing up for it. When I walked out, he saw me almost immediately. A flicker of a smile passed through his eyes before he looked down again, respectful distance, as always. But for some reason, I stopped walking. Riley, I called softly. He brushed his hands on a rag and came over, cautious, like approaching a shy animal. Hi, he said. Hi, I echoed, folding my arms. Got a minute? He nodded, a little uncertain. Of course. We ended up walking the perimeter of the field. The air brisk enough to sting, but not bitter. The kind of cold that makes conversation honest. After a while, I said it, the thing I'd been circling for months. I need to say this without interruption. Can you do that? His reply came instantly. Yes. I looked straight ahead, watching the grass bend under the wind. I've been so angry with you for so long. I almost forgot how much of my life that anger was taking up. It kept me alive when I needed it. But lately, I trailed off. Lately, it just feels heavy. He didn't speak, just slowed his pace slightly to match mine. I built armor, I said. For myself. For Zoila. It's been my religion. And you. I laughed under my breath. The kind of laugh that doesn't belong to humor. You became the ghost I polished that armor against. Every success, every decision, I made sure, it whispered. You were wrong to leave. He looked down. I was wrong. I know, I said quickly. But I still needed to prove it. The clatter of children's laughter in the distance carried over the wind, grounding us both. I don't hate you, I said finally. Not anymore, but I'm still tired. There's a difference. His hands clenched once, quietly, before he nodded. You have every right to be tired. You did all the work I was supposed to do and then some. The simplicity of it almost broke me. He stopped walking then and faced me. I should have fought to know her, he said. But I didn't fight for you either. I told myself staying gone was noble, that I was giving you freedom. But the truth is, I stayed gone because I was ashamed. Because coming back meant facing the damage I caused. I exhaled. You're right. It wasn't cruelty, just truth. He swallowed hard, eyes glassy. And every day I wake up thinking about how to move differently, not to erase what I did, but to build something that could exist beside it. There, it was no defenses, no grandeur, just repentance in its truest form, slow, unglamorous, human. We stood there quietly, the breeze tugging at the edges of our coats. Do you ever wish things had gone differently? He asked. All the time, I admitted. But wishing backward isn't the same as wanting to go back. He nodded slowly. No, it isn't. There was something gentler in his expression now, almost reverence. He reached up to pinch the bridge of his nose, the same nervous gesture he'd had when we were young, and laughed softly. You know, I used to think love was a thing you either had or didn't. That once it was gone for good. And now? I asked. Now I think it hardens, he said after a moment. Changes. Form. Becomes quiet. Reliable. Maybe even patient enough to survive distance. I looked at him, surprised by the accuracy. It doesn't disappear, I agreed. It just gets disciplined. He smiled faintly. You always were better with words than I was. Not true, I said. You just stopped earning the right to hear them, he nodded, blinking hard. Fair enough. For a while, we didn't say anything more. The wind carried pieces of conversation from the playground, teachers calling names, kids shouting, sneakers squeaking across the blacktop. Life moved on, unaware of the quiet reconstruction happening a few yards away. Finally, he said, I don't expect a future with you, Judith. That's not why I'm here. But if it's possible to exist in your world without being a constant reminder of everything I broke, I'd like to try that. There was a tenderness in the phrasing that felt almost protective. I think you already are, I said. Then, softer. But it doesn't mean I'm ready for what that might mean. He nodded. Then, we'll stay here. In whatever this is. When he said it, we'll stay here. I realized what had changed. We both finally understood the value of not rushing to fix what could only heal with time. I spent years convincing myself I needed to unlove you to survive, I said quietly. But I think it was never about unloving. It was about learning where to put the love so it didn't hurt anymore. And where is it now? He asked. I looked at the school beyond the fence, at Zoila's classroom window faintly glowing from inside. In her, I said. That's where it belongs. He followed my gaze, and his voice broke. That's the best place it could be. Something in me eased a surrender, not of control, but of judgment. He took a small step closer, still leaving enough distance to make sure I could leave if I needed to. Thank you, he said. Not for forgiveness, just for letting me show up these past months. It gave me a chance to learn who I might have become if I hadn't run. I hope you like him better, I said softly. I do, he whispered. A breeze passed between us, lifting the faint scent of rain off the grass. The moment felt suspended, too fragile to touch, too complete to prolong. There were no promises to start again, no talk of what-ifs or second chances, just two people who had stopped being prisoners of the same story. When I finally turned to go, he said one last thing quietly, almost to himself. You said something once, he murmured, that believing costs too much. Maybe it still does. But today, standing here, I think it's the first time in years I felt grateful for the price. I didn't answer. My throat was too full of everything unsaid. Instead, I nodded once and walked toward the parking lot, the gravel crunching softly beneath my shoes. As I reached the car, I paused. Looking back, he was still standing there, watching the wind ripple through the courtyard banners. We stand together. For the first time, I didn't feel bitterness at the sight of him, just stillness, reflection. I didn't hope for reconciliation. I'd learned hope can sometimes wound more deeply than hurt. But for the first time, I allowed myself something smaller, humbler, and maybe braver. I allowed myself to wonder if love, in its new, quieter shape, could live somewhere between what was broken and what was still beautiful. By the time the school year ended, the air was heavy with the scent of summer, the faint sweetness of cut grass, crayons, and goodbye. Zoila had grown taller somehow, though it had only been months. The wide-eyed little girl who once hid behind her backpack now moved through the school like she belonged to it. Her laughter carried through the halls. Her name was no longer whispered in pity, but called out in friendship. The year had changed her. It had changed all of us. On the last day, I stood among the other parents outside the gymnasium. The balloons half deflated from the heat. The banner above the door reading, "Moving up and moving on." Students spilled out in clusters, shouting, waving certificates, arms draped around each other. And then came Zoila, paper crown slightly crooked, cheeks flushed from excitement. "Mom!" she called, running toward me. I barely had time to crouch before she crushed herself into my arms. Her certificate crinkled between us. "Best creative voice," I read aloud, smiling. "That's perfect." "It's even better," she said proudly. "Mr. Hundley made that category just for me." Of course he did. Across the courtyard, I saw him near the stage, sleeves rolled up, helping the janitors stack chairs. No news cameras. No speeches, just quiet work. He caught my eye briefly, and I realized something I hadn't noticed before. His name no longer hung on every banner, every bulletin board, every press release. The school he'd once reshaped to reflect himself now functioned easily without his shadow. That was the point. He'd finally built something that didn't need him to be the center. As we drove home that afternoon, Zoila hummed softly in the back seat, crown tilted against the window. At a red light, she said suddenly, "Mom? You know what I like about Mr. Hundley?" "What's that?" "He doesn't walk ahead anymore," she said simply. "He walks with people now." I felt my throat tighten. "He does, doesn't he?" The light turned green, but I waited a second longer before pressing the gas. That evening, while Zoila packed her backpack for summer reading camp, I found myself stepping out onto the porch again. The same porch where, months ago, everything had felt unresolved. The same crooked wooden step. The same wind chime whispering soft notes into the dusk. But the night felt different now. Lighter somehow, as if the air itself had forgiven something I wasn't ready to name. I watched as a car rolled slowly past the house, his gray sedan. He didn't stop this time. He just lifted a hand in greeting when he saw the light on. I raised my mug in return, a quiet acknowledgement between people who no longer needed to relive what broke them to know what still bound them. The next week, the local newspaper featured a small piece about the school's new recognition program. Beneath the headline, "A Culture of Courage," there was a photo of students helping paint the new mentorship office. No mention of his money, no mention of his title. Just kids learning to look out for each other, and that was legacy enough. A few days later, the board offered him another district position. Larger campus, higher salary, national spotlight. He declined. He told them, "I'm where I need to be." When I heard that through a colleague at the PTA, I didn't know whether to smile or cry. Perhaps both. Because that decision, quiet and unpublicized, said more than every televised speech he'd ever given. Presence, I realized, had finally replaced prestige. Over the following weeks, life fell into a softer rhythm. Zoila spent afternoons biking with her friends, her laughter echoing against the picket fences. Her handwriting improved. She stopped asking for reassurance every time she tried something new. Confidence had settled into her like sunlight in water, steady and sure. One evening, she came into the kitchen, holding her old crumpled poem, "When They Called Me Weird." "Can we hang it in your office?" she asked. "I don't want to hide it in my room anymore." When I asked her why, she said, "Because it's the story that started our story." I hung it, right above my desk. Later that night, I sat there reading it again, the careful pencil marks, the hesitation in her lines. I thought about how stories repeat themselves sometimes, but gentler the second time. Because people learn where to open their hands instead of closing them. Riley had once believed legacy was about buildings and institutions. I had once believed survival meant shutting every door behind me. And somewhere between those two illusions, a little girl stood up and dared to speak softly, bravely, and made us both remember what legacy truly was. A week later, the school held a small summer gathering for parents and students, a celebration before break. I almost didn't go. But Zoila insisted. When we arrived, he was there, standing under the same oak tree where it had all begun. A few teachers chatted nearby, students weaving in and out, darting between the picnic tables. Riley's shirt sleeves were rolled to his elbows, a faint streak of paint on the collar where they'd been touching up the playground benches. Zoila spotted him first and ran ahead. "Mr. Hundley, we got new paintbrushes." He laughed, crouching to meet her eye level. "Perfect timing, you can pick the first color." I stood back, watching him hand her the brush, steadying the jar so she wouldn't spill. Watching her talk, with ease safe. Seen, certain. There are moments in life when words feel unnecessary because presence fills every space they ever could. This was one of those moments. When she turned to show me her hands, palms streaked with yellow, her smile wide and unguarded. I saw it clearly. She was no longer a child afraid of her difference. She was a girl, standing in her light. And I realized then, so was I. Later, as the sun began to set, Riley came over to where I sat beneath the tree's shade. He held out 2 cups of lemonade, condensation sliding down the sides. I accepted one with a small nod. Old times usually came with storms, I teased. "And maybe this one doesn't need to," he said quietly. We stayed there a long while, watching Zoila help the younger students hang the painted banner over the stage. The colors were uneven, the letters wobbly, but it was beautiful. "You did this," I said softly. He shook his head. "We did. You taught her courage. She taught me patience." The way he said it, without pride, without apology, felt like the truest form of grace. For a moment, the air went still. Summer light melted through the branches, turning everything gold. "This," I murmured, nodding toward the laughter spilling across the courtyard. "This is the legacy, not the programs or the speeches. Just the fact that she'll never know silence the way we did." He followed my gaze, eyes damp from emotion he didn't bother to hide. "Then I think we did something right." When the sun slipped past the edge of the field, leaving streaks of amber across the playground, Zoila ran to us holding her paintbrush high. "Look, it's finished." Her fingers were stained, her smile unstoppable. Between us all, somewhere between the painted words and the laughter, something settled that didn't feel like an ending at all. Love hadn't been reclaimed. It had been rebuilt layer by layer, in the gentle hands of a child and the quieter hearts of 2 people who finally learned how to stay. And standing there, watching the last colors dry under a forgiving sky, I understood what this story was never truly about. It wasn't about a billionaire who came back for redemption. It was about a father who finally arrived.